Whispers on Steel, Book 1 of the Railway Inheritance, written by Melody Gilly. Chapter 3. The feather pen balanced in Sullivan's hand as he glided and curved the ink into his silent words. The paper was dimly lit by a single candle, revealing the square jaw of a man whose presence commanded the shadows. Particles of dust danced like restless spirits around the flame. Old books lined his long Victorian cherry desk, their corners torn with age yet arranged in perfect, meticulous stacks. Bookcases towered over him like silent sentinels, while unlit candle sconces gathered dust on the gold wallpaper. Their intricate designs cast serpentine shadows when his flame flickered, mirroring the dark thoughts that coiled within his skull, framed with glossy black locks that fell in wisps beyond his chin. The winds of a stormy night pressed against a large window, dressed in burgundy curtains and gold ropes. The nib of his pen scratched across the parchment as he completed his verse. In chambers of inherited glory, I reign, master of knowledge, heir to the name. Yet shadows grow longer with each passing day, and whispers of greatness begin to decay. What use is a legacy carved into stone when the carver stands watching, forever alone? The ink of my bloodline flows dark through these halls, while I pace like a spectre confined by its walls. He wiped the ink from the nib of the feather pen and laid it on the newly written prose. A cruel smile played at the corners of his mouth as he read his own words. Feeling a sudden temperature rise, he unbuttoned the 2 buttons of his finely pressed dress shirt and wiped the sweat that gathered at the back of his neck. I have read hundreds of books, he spoke to the empty room, his voice carrying an edge sharp enough to cut. I gain something with each one, and yet I do not understand why you linger. His eyes darted to the darkest corner of the study, addressing a presence only he could sense. How could you compose such thoughts? He said to himself, fingers tracing the lines of his poem. The Von Vogel name carries weight, carries history. And yet here I remain. He rose from his plush red-cushioned chair, both palms pressed to the fine surface. A hunger stirred in his belly, and his mind had stirred a craving. He glazed his finger along the drippings of wax that oozed from the top of the candlestick, imagining it was something else entirely. The air grew thick with his thoughts as he tore himself away from the light and melted into the darkness of the abyssal study. Taking slow but full steps down the wall of history, science, maps and literature, all catalogued by generations of Von Vogels before him, he found himself standing at the window and pushed back the curtain. Lightning flashed in the distance, and within seconds, the growling thunder. Rain began to pour down onto the garden that rested outside. The trees absorbed the bountiful rain and danced with the wind as it twirled their branches. Thoughts and theories and a name that echoes through time, but not enough companions to hear it, he whispered, his breath fogging the glass. I am respected, I am feared, I am empty. His mind echoed after each sentence that crossed his mind. I am empty. Another bolt of lightning flashed, and as quick as a second, he met his fist with the crash of thunder against the glass, sending cracks up, down, and sideways through the pane. Blood trickled between his knuckles, but he smiled at the pain. He turned away from the window, tossing back the curtain against the glass. Rage filled his spirit as he flung books across the study. A sudden loss of respect for the books that were now deemed useless knowledge. Wasted pages for pointless words. How could I have so many ideas, so much power, and yet remain so still? Fumes pressured against his skull, his eyes ablaze, burning brighter than any candle flame. His shoes thumping with each step against the carpet. He felt as if he was wading through water with each heavy step. He left the study as if it were confused and unable to understand why he had such a mountain of knowledge. The volumes perhaps surprised that it could not give him the answer he was looking for. Exhausted from thinking, he dragged his fingernails against the walls as he made his way down the unlit corridor, letting his eyes adjust to the darkness as he walked. His heart filled with fire, and yet it was dying. He came to the grand steps of the mansion and thought about throwing himself down, but the fire remained burning. He would live. He knew it. The Von Vogel line would not end with him. Glazing his hand on the fine cherry wood, he growled in frustration. What kept him going? What kept him from ending it all? He thought. Closing his eyes, he took a step down, and then another, until he found himself at the bottom of the staircase. The hollow feeling of space filled his body with weakness, a sickness that stopped the blood from circulating back to his heart, pooling into his legs to weigh him down. The grandfather clock in the hall struck midnight, each chime echoing through the empty mansion like an accusation. Sullivan's eyes fixed on the railway schedules framed on the wall, pristine documents dating back to 1885, when the Von Vogel line first carved its way through Yorkshire's heart. His uncle Sebastian's legacy, his birthright, his prison, now his burden to bear. A telegram lay crumpled in his pocket. Delivered that morning, Matthew's girl arrived Yorkshire. Stop, staying with former Inspector Constant. Stop, your father's records remain sealed. Stop. The paper had grown soft with his constant handling, each word burning into his consciousness, like the brands they used to mark the railway cars. Lightning illuminated the entrance hall, casting strange shadows through the stained glass window above the door. The Von Vogel family crest, a raven perched on railway tracks. For a moment, in the electric light, the bird seemed to move, its glass eyes following him with his Aunt Elizabeth's gentle judgment. You would understand, wouldn't you? He whispered to the empty air. You who took her in, protected her secrets. His voice trailed off as thunder rolled across the estate. Somewhere in the distance, metal shrieked against metal as his test train navigated the old lines, searching for a path back through time. He pulled a worn photograph from his waistcoat pocket. Helena Matthews in his uncle's private office, her hand resting possessively on a leather-bound journal. The same journal her daughter now carried, unknowing of its true contents. The storm raged on as Sullivan Von Vogel, the last of his line, descended into his cellars, where maps of the old railway network covered the walls like a spider's web. Each line, each station, each secret siding marked in his uncle's precise hand. And there, in the center, a single notation in red ink. HM File 1941. Dresden route. He traced the route with steady fingers. Soon, he whispered to the ghost of his uncle, to Helena's memory, and to the daughter who held the key without knowing it. Soon, he began his ascent back up the cellar steps when a voice greeted him. Good evening, Sullivan. The voice drifted down from the top of the stairs. Harold stood there, his white collar wilting beneath aged suspenders, wisps of silver hair clinging to his spotted scalp like morning frost. Despite the years etched into his face, his eyes retained an unsettling brightness, azure pools that seemed to reflect every tragedy they'd witnessed at Whispering Pines. He balanced precariously between his cane and a crystal tumble of whiskey, the absence of his right leg a testament to some long-ago railway accident. You look chilled. I was about to light a fire. The tap of his cane against the black marble floors echoed like distant Morse code as he hobbled toward the lounge. Quite the tempest brewing tonight. Sullivan lingered in the doorway, watching as Harold set his whiskey on the mantel and began feeding logs into the brick fireplace. Clouds of ash rose like industrial smoke, each log landing with the hollow sound of coal cars being coupled. Please, Harold, allow me. The small act of compassion made Sullivan's dormant heart flutter briefly to life. He guided his old friend to one of the fireside chairs, returning the whiskey to Harold's trembling hand. I should be caring for you now. I thought about retiring many times, sir. Harold's voice carried the weight of decades of service. Too many secrets in these walls keep me here. Besides, he sipped his whiskey, I believe you'd lose your last tether to sanity without me, unless, of course, you find a woman to fill these halls with life again. Women do love their mysteries. And you, sir, have inherited a mansion full of them. A woman would find only nightmares here, Sullivan murmured, striking a match. The flame caught the kindling, casting his shadow against the gold-papered walls. The windows, draped in blood-red curtains and gold rope, reflected the growing firelight like signal lamps in the darkness. This place haunts even me now, but still home. Harold smiled, massaging his phantom limb. Your father spent countless nights here after acquiring the Dresden line, buried in manifests and schedules with your uncle Sebastian. Your mother was the only one who could pull him back from those dark railways of the mind. He paused, coughing wetly into a handkerchief. Though some schedules were better left unexamined, weren't they? Especially in 42. Sullivan watched the shadows dance across the curtains as lightning fractured the night. For a moment, 3 silhouettes stood where there should have been one. A pregnant woman, a man with broad shoulders, and his own form between them. With each flash, the figures seemed to move, performing some tragic play upon the crimson backdrop. After your mother's passing, Harold's voice had grown feeble. Your father lost his way. All those secret shipments, those midnight voyages to Germany. He wheezed, crumpling the handkerchief to hide the blood speckling its white surface. I've carried those secrets too long, Sullivan, too long. The shadows on the curtain shifted. The woman's figure crumpled, the man reaching desperately toward her as she faded into nothing. Sullivan watched, his own shadow standing alone, feeling the weight of generations of Von Vogel secrets pressing down upon him. Harold's coughing grew violent, each spasm racking his frail body. The handkerchief fell from his trembling fingers, revealing dark stains in the firelight. The manifests, he wheezed. The ones your father ordered me to burn that night. I kept copies, his bright eyes, now fever-glazed, fixed on Sullivan, hidden in the old signal box. Helena, she wasn't the only one who knew. I saw everything. Sullivan moved behind Harold's chair, his shadow stretching across the old servant like a shroud. All these years, he said softly, you've carried our secrets. His hands rested on Harold's shoulders, feeling the bones beneath the worn fabric. Your father. Harold's breath came in ragged gasps. He tried to stop it at the end, the shipments. But Sebastian, another coughing fit seized him. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth when he caught his breath. I should have spoken up, should have told the authorities. All those trains and nights, the weight never matched the manifests. The weight of secrets, Sullivan murmured, his fingers tightening slightly. It's crushing you, isn't it, old friend? Like the train that took your leg. Another Von Vogel debt you've paid in flesh and bone. Harold's hand found Sullivan's, gripping it with surprising strength. You're not like them, he whispered. You still have your mother's heart. Hush, Sullivan soothed, moving one hand to the back of Harold's neck. The old man's pulse fluttered beneath his fingers like a trapped bird. You've served us too faithfully, carried too much for too long. I see how it torments you, the memories, the guilt, the pain. His voice remained gentle, almost loving. Let me free you from this burden. Tears slid down Harold's weathered cheeks. Your mother, she made me promise to protect you from becoming... He couldn't finish. I know, Sullivan whispered. And you have. But now it's my turn to protect you. His grip tightened, thumb finding the pressure point behind Harold's ear. No more secrets, no more pain, no more lying awake remembering the sound of those midnight trains. The crack was almost delicate, like the sound of a railway switch being thrown, changing the course of fate. Harold slumped forward, his cane clattering to the floor. In death, his face held an expression of profound relief, as if some great weight had indeed been lifted. Sullivan carefully arranged the body, making it appear as though Harold had simply fallen asleep by the fire. His hands didn't shake as he picked up the bloodied handkerchief and fed it to the flames. But when he reached for Harold's whiskey glass, he noticed something that stopped him cold. A single tear had fallen on the old man's collar. His own. Outside, the storm raged on, and somewhere in the darkness, wheels turned on ancient tracks, carrying their burden of secrets into the night. Sullivan stood motionless, watching his shadow merge with Harold's on the crimson curtains, the last act of their long performance together. When the grandfather clock struck 1, he finally moved, retrieving paper and pen from his father's desk. There would be questions about Harold's death, of course. A heart attack, the doctor would say. Natural causes. Expected, given his age and infirmity. But first, he had a signal box to visit, before anyone else discovered what Harold had hidden there. The old man's final gift, or perhaps his final revenge. Morning fog clung to the Yorkshire hills as Uncle Gregory's Jaguar wound through narrow country lanes. Sonya watched sheep grazing behind ancient stone walls. Their wool was damp with dew. The leather-bound journal lay open in her lap, its pages filled with her mother's precise handwriting. July 3rd, 1941. The night shift is the hardest. Empty offices hold too many shadows, too many whispers. Sebastian insists I personally log the midnight freight, says my ear for engine sounds makes me invaluable. But last night, the Dresden car's wheels sang a different tune. Too heavy for its manifest, too quiet for cold. When I mentioned the discrepancy, he touched my shoulder and said, some secrets are better left in the dark. His hand lingered too long. The way he looks at me now, I fear I've noticed too much. Penny for your thoughts? Gregory's voice broke through her reading. They were entering the town now, cobblestone streets giving way to newer pavement. The museum's quite something. Opened just last month. They've restored one of the original Von Vogel engines. Mother never mentioned working the night shift, Sonya said carefully, closing the journal. Was that common for secretaries? Gregory's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. Sebastian had particular requirements for his staff. He pulled into a parking space before a cheerful storefront. Ah, here we are. Maggie's Bakery. Best Yorkshire tea cakes in the county. The bell chimed as they entered, releasing a wave of warm, sweet air. Glass cases displayed golden croissants, plump scones dotted with currants, and twisted cinnamon bread dusted with sugar. Gregory Constant. A plump woman in a flour-dusted apron emerged from behind the counter. And this must be Helena's girl. Look at you, your mother's very image. She turned to the display cases. What can I tempt you with, dear? The almond pastries were your mother's favorite, you know. She'd stop in every morning before heading to the railway office. Sonya chose an almond pastry and a pot of Earl Grey, trying to imagine her mother sitting in this very shop, perhaps writing in her journal, unaware of what lay ahead. The tea was served in delicate bone china, steam rising like morning fog over the tracks. The Railway Museum occupied the renovated central station, its Victorian ironwork newly painted in deep green and gold. The entrance hall featured a massive mural depicting the evolution of Yorkshire's railway system, from the first horse-drawn coal wagons to the sleek modern trains of 1950. Look here. Gregory pointed to a display case containing meticulously preserved documents, the original 1885 charter establishing the private railway lines. The Von Vogels weren't the first to lay track in Yorkshire, but they were the ones who connected it all. Coal mines to factories, factories to ports. They moved through a gallery dedicated to the golden age of steam. Glass cases housed conductors' pocket watches, brass signal lamps, and leather-bound logbooks. A recreation of a station master's office from 1920 showed the complex system of telegraphs and signal boxes that had kept trains running safely through 2 world wars. The main exhibition hall took Sonia's breath away. Beneath the soaring Victorian glass roof, a massive steam engine dominated the space. The night flyer, the placard read, Private Von Vogel Line, 1939 to 1943. Primary route, Yorkshire to Dresden. The engine was a masterpiece of industrial engineering, 20 feet of gleaming black steel and brass. Its massive driving wheels stood taller than a man, and the distinctive Von Vogel crest, a raven perched on crossing tracks, was picked out in gold leaf on the tender. This engine could pull 50 coal cars, Gregory explained, his voice dropping. Though some say it often ran with just 1 or 2 special cargo cars in the war years. Lighter loads, but heavily guarded, a section titled Railways at War showed how Yorkshire's lines had been crucial to the British war effort. But one photograph caught Sonia's eye, a night shot of the Dresden-bound freight, steam billowing in the darkness. A solitary figure stood in the station window, barely visible, something about the pose. The hair on the back of her neck prickled. She turned slightly, catching a glimpse of movement in the shadowy gallery above. A tall figure in a dark suit stood at the iron railing, watching. Even at this distance, she could feel the intensity of his gaze. When she looked again, he had vanished. "Uncle," she said quietly, "who maintains the Von Vogel private lines now?" Officially, they're closed. Gregory was studying the engine's massive drive rods, though some say there's still activity on the old tracks. The last Von Vogel heir, Sullivan, he's been pushing to reopen them. Claims it's his hereditary right. He checked his watch. "We should go, dear. Storm's coming in." As they left, Sonya glanced back at the night flyer. In the growing darkness, the engine seemed to loom larger, its brass fittings gleaming like knowing eyes. Thunder rolled across Yorkshire's hills, and somewhere in the distance, metal sang against metal, the sound of wheels on an abandoned track. Dawn crept across the kitchen, of whispering pines like spilled honey. Sullivan stood at the marble counter, hands covered in flour, kneading bread dough with methodical precision. The ritual had become his morning sanctuary: measure, mix, knead, shape. Control in its purest form. Steam rose from the pour-over coffee set up beside him, the dark liquid dripping through the filter with the steady rhythm of a signal box timer. He'd acquired the taste for this particular brewing method during his time in Vienna, studying railway engineering. The Europeans understood precision. Outside the kitchen windows, two men in dark overalls carried a burden wrapped in canvas toward the groundskeeper's cottage. Harold's final resting place would be beneath his beloved rose garden. A fitting end for such faithful service. "Everything must be perfect today," Sullivan murmured to the empty kitchen, sliding the shaped loaf into the oven. The dough would rise, transform, and become something new, just as the Von Vogel legacy must rise again. He poured his coffee into a bone china cup, the same pattern his mother had preferred. "The signal box first," he said to his reflection in the window. "Harold's little insurance policy must be retrieved before anyone else discovers it. Then the museum opening. Maintain appearances, charm the board members, remind them who still owns those tracks." The bread baked while he dressed, charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, his father's ruby cufflinks. By the time he descended, the kitchen was filled with the scent of fresh bread and carefully orchestrated plans. But plans, like railway schedules, were subject to disruption. The British Rail boardroom hadn't changed since the nationalisation. Same oak-panelled walls, same leather chairs, same portrait of the first Von Vogel locomotive hanging opposite the windows. Only the ashtrays were new, now filled with the butts of Rothmans and Benson, and hedges, where once there had been pipe tobacco. Sullivan Von Vogel stood before the wall of windows, London's skyline hazed with industrial smoke behind him. His presentation materials lay untouched on the polished table, blueprints of the old private lines, structural surveys, and projected revenues. But it was the photograph of the night flyer that drew every eye, his uncle's pride, now restored and waiting in the Yorkshire Museum. "Gentlemen," he began, "the Von Vogel lines weren't just tracks through Yorkshire. They were arteries of commerce, connecting Britain to the continent through channels that existed long before the Channel Tunnel was dreamed of." He traced a route on the map. "These private lines, dormant since '43, represent an opportunity we can't ignore in today's economic climate." Sir Richard Blackwood, Transport Minister, tapped his cigarette ash. "The official position remains clear, Mr. Von Vogel. Those lines were decommissioned for good reason. The war is 30 years past," Sullivan countered. "Britain's relationship with Europe has changed. These routes could what?" Interrupted James Morrison, new head of British Rail's freight division. "Could offer what our current lines don't?" Something was knowing in his tone that made the other board members shift uncomfortably. The meeting concluded with practiced politeness and carefully worded deferrals. But as Sullivan gathered his materials, Morrison lingered, waiting until the room had cleared. "Walk with me," he said, leading the way to the executive bar on the top floor. The space reeked of leather and cigarette smoke, London's afternoon traffic humming far below. The executive bar occupied the entire top floor of British Rail's headquarters, its wood-panelled walls displaying vintage railway photographs, carefully curated pieces of history. James Morrison belonged here like a snake in its natural habitat. At 58, he carried himself with the easy confidence of a man who had survived the transition from private to nationalised rail through careful cultivation of secrets. Morrison ordered scotch for both of them, then settled into a leather armchair. "Your uncle," he said, studying his drink, "understood something crucial about private railways. Official manifests tell one story. The actual cargo." He smiled thinly. "Well, that's where the real profit lies." Sullivan's glass paused halfway to his lips. "I'm not sure I follow. Don't play naive, Von Vogel. It doesn't suit you." Morrison leaned forward. "The 60s aren't so different from the 40s. Different commodities, different destinations, same principles. Your uncle's old routes, particularly the lesser-known spurs, could be very valuable to certain interests. Especially with the current situations in Belfast and Berlin." The scotch suddenly tasted like ash in Sullivan's mouth. "You seem well informed about my uncle's operations." "Your uncle," Morrison said, watching London's grey afternoon through glass that cost more than most railway workers made in a year, understood the real purpose of private lines. He opened a silver cigarette case. Sullivan noticed the Wehrmacht insignia, almost hidden by Morrison's manicured fingers. "During the war, I was la liaison between British transport and the intelligence services. Fascinating, the things one learned about cargo manifests." Sullivan studied Morrison more carefully now. The carefully styled silver hair, the Savile Row suit, the Oxford accent that occasionally slipped to reveal something harder beneath. A man who had rebuilt himself, just as Sullivan was trying to rebuild his family's legacy. "The troubles in Belfast have created certain logistical challenges," Morrison continued. "Official channels are watched too closely, but private lines, especially ones with documented historical use." He smiled thinly. "The IRA pays well for secure transport. So do other interested parties." "And Berlin?" Sullivan prompted. Morrison's eyes gleamed. "Ah, now that's the real opportunity. The wall has made traditional routes problematic, but there are still people who need to move things, or themselves, between east and west. Your uncle's old connection to Dresden could be very valuable. The Stasi may control the official crossings, but they don't know about the maintenance tunnels under the old Von Vogel freight yard." He pulled out a leather folder, decades old but well preserved. "Your uncle kept meticulous records of every unofficial passage. Dates, cargo weights, payment arrangements. Harold was kind enough to share these before his retirement." Morrison's pause carried volumes of unspoken knowledge. "The past decade has created new markets," Morrison continued. "Arms to Belfast, dissidents to West Berlin, art and gold from the east, intelligence in all directions." He leaned forward. "Mi-6 has expressed particular interest in reviving certain arrangements from the war years. Unofficial, of course, deniable. And British Rail's official position will remain exactly what it is, denial of all reopening requests. Perfect cover, wouldn't you say? The track's officially dead while carrying more cargo than they ever did during the war." Thunder rolled across London again. Morrison stood, moving to a hidden wall safe behind a painting of the Flying Scotsman. The documents he withdrew bore both Nazi and Soviet stamps, along with Sebastian von Vogel's distinctive signature. "Your uncle wasn't just running military supplies during the war," Morrison said softly. "He was building a network, intelligence operations, escape routes, hidden banking channels. The Von Vogel lines were never just about trains, they were about power, information, control." He spread the papers across the bar's mahogany surface. "These networks still exist, waiting. Like those tracks in Yorkshire." Sullivan recognized some of the signatures on the documents. names that now occupied the highest offices in West German industry and East German politics. The web of connections was staggering. "My associates would like to revive these old partnerships," Morrison said. "The Cold War has made certain arrangements both lucrative and necessary. MI6 needs secure routes for their Berlin operations. The IRA needs untraceable supply lines. And there are other clients, more private ones, willing to pay handsomely for discreet transport services." He pulled out one final document, a map showing how the Von Vogel lines connected to a vast network of underground freight passages extending from Yorkshire to the continent. Many of the routes weren't on any official registry. "Consider carefully," Morrison said, returning the documents to the safe. "These opportunities won't wait forever. The world is changing, Sullivan. The question is, will you change with it, as your uncle did, or fade into history like those rusting tracks?" Outside, the evening lights of London began to flicker on, and somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed like a ghost from the past. Sullivan felt the weight of his father's ruby cufflinks, remembered the warmth of Harold's last breath, and thought of Sonya Matthews, whose very existence threatened to derail everything these opportunities promised. Morrison's card seemed to burn in his pocket, along with all the dark possibilities it represented. The museum's Victorian ironwork soared overhead as Sullivan stood on the upper gallery, surveying his family's legacy below. The night flyer dominated the space, his uncle's pride now just a showpiece. His fingers itched to restore it, to hear those wheels singing against steel again. Movement near the engine caught his eye. A woman, young blonde hair, caught the light like signal flames in darkness. Something about her stance, the way she studied the exhibits with such intensity, recognition hit him like a coupling shock. Helena Matthews' daughter, Sonya. She was more beautiful than the surveillance photographs had suggested. There was an innocence in her bearing that made his carefully constructed plans suddenly feel brittle. As she moved through the exhibits, he found himself tracking her movements with an attention usually reserved for railway timetables. Gregory Constant hovered near her like a guard dog, his ex-inspector's instincts intact. Their presence here wasn't a coincidence. They were studying the Dresden Line exhibits, lingering over the wartime photographs. Sullivan's hand tightened on the iron railing. He had prepared for every contingency and mapped out each possibility like parallel tracks stretching into darkness. But this unforeseen stirring in his chest as he watched her, this was dangerous. She turned suddenly as if sensing his presence. For a moment, their eyes almost met across the space. He stepped back into the shadow, pulse quickening. In that brief glimpse, he had seen something that threatened to derail everything, a light that could illuminate all his carefully hidden spaces. Thunder rolled outside as Sullivan made his way to the back exit, avoiding Gregory's detection. His morning's plans lay scattered like derailed cargo, replaced by a single consuming thought. Sonya Matthews was both a threat and possibility, a key that could either unlock his family's redemption or destroy everything he'd worked for. Rain began to fall as his car wound through Yorkshire's lanes. The fresh bread lay forgotten on his kitchen counter, and in his mind, new plans formed, darker, more complex, centered around the girl who had unwittingly stepped onto his tracks. "The light," he whispered to his empty car, "sometimes shows us things we're not ready to see." Behind him, the museum's clock tower vanished in the growing storm, and somewhere on the old lines, a signal changed from green to red. As Sullivan drove away from the museum, the signal box key burned in his pocket like a hot coal. The morning's encounter had forced a change in plans. He couldn't risk being seen near box 23 now, not with Gregory Constant in town. The old inspector knew too much about railway security protocols. He pulled over, calculating new possibilities. The documents had waited this long. They could wait another day. For now, a more intriguing puzzle demanded his attention: Sonya Matthews, and the light she threatened to cast into his carefully maintained shadows. In his rearview mirror, the distant signal box stood sentinel over the abandoned tracks, its secrets still safely locked away. Tomorrow would require perfect timing and precise execution. But today he would watch, plan and wonder about the strange new signal that fate had thrown across his path.